Speaking of outreach and preaching the gospel, as I mentioned, that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So turn with me to the book of Romans. To the book of Romans, and we're going to read starting from chapter 1. And if you look at your bulletins, I know the passage says we're starting at verse 14, but just kidding, we're starting at verse 1. So Romans chapter 1, starting at verse 1, let's read verses 1 to 6 together. When you get there, read with me. Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel of God, which he promised before through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, concerning his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who was born of the seed of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead. Through him we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to the faith among all nations for his name, among whom you also are the called of Jesus Christ, to all who are in Rome, beloved of God, called to be saints. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. A very, very formal and packed introduction that Paul writes here. When I write a letter, usually I say, hello, so-and-so. And I get right to the point. But Paul writes this very densely packed introduction. It's almost like he put in a letter of reference for himself with this letter to the Christians in Rome. And what I want to focus on this morning from those 6 verses, I want to focus on verse 1, where Paul addresses who am I and how do I define myself, right? For those who are reading this letter, he wants to let them know, I am Paul. Who is Paul? Because Paul was not well known in the Christian world as he is today, right? So he's introducing himself. So he says, Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel of Christ. Now think about this. Think about this. When you write a letter, okay, let's say you're writing a letter to someone that doesn't know you and you want to introduce yourself, you want to establish your credibility, what would you write about yourself? Think about that, right? Think about the things that you would put down in a cover letter, for example, or a letter of introduction where you want someone to know what kind of person you are. You would probably write down your work experience, maybe a little bit about the kind of person you are. I don't know if it's appropriate to write about your interests, but you would let the person know about what you have done. Right? Because many times when we want to introduce ourselves, we want people to know what we've done, what we've accomplished, to establish an idea of who I am. Now, Paul, what does he say? He starts off with, first he gives his name, Paul. That's nice, right? Now we know his name is Paul. The second thing that he says about himself is that he is a bondservant of Jesus Christ. A bondservant, also another word that is translated is slave. He is a bondservant, he is a slave. So he starts out with, I'm a slave. Guys, right? I don't know if you would write a letter and introduce yourself this way. Hi, I'm Martin. I'm a slave. It's kind of odd if you think about it, but that's Paul. Paul establishes right away, I am a slave. A slave to who? A slave to Jesus Christ. Then the next thing he says is, I am called to be an apostle. I have a calling. An apostle, someone who is sent. I have been sent with a message. What message am I sent with? What is my purpose? To what am I a slave? Separated to the gospel of God. Right? So Paul right away in this one short verse, in this introduction, defines the purpose of his existence. He exists because he is a slave to Jesus. He exists because he's been called to an apostle, to be an apostle, and he exists because he's been separated. Remember the word holy means separated. He's separated unto the gospel of God. He's been set aside to be used to bring the gospel of God to the world. Right? And this is our identity as well. Right? This is something we need to realize. This is our identity as well. Each and every Christian. Right? And I know that as Christians, we like to focus on God is love and we are his sons and daughters. And this has been our focus in many of the messages we've been preaching, right? We are sons and daughters. Remember when we looked at the Lord's Prayer, how did Jesus teach us to pray? He didn't say, our Master in heaven, right? He said, in this manner, pray, our Father in heaven. Jesus wants to put us in the right mindset. We are sons and daughters, yes, so never forget that. But never also forget that there is another aspect of our relationship. He is our Master. Jesus died. He paid a price to redeem us. When you've been redeemed, sounds great, right? He's my redeemer. He's my redeemer. You know what it means when you've been redeemed? That means you're owned. You are not your own master. You are owned. And so Jesus is our master. And so we belong to him. And we've been called to go out to be the living gospel of Jesus Christ. Right? The Bible is a gospel, yes. Jesus Christ's life is a gospel, but we are called to go out and live it so people can see it, to be the bearer of good news, right? Blessed are the peacemakers. Be a peacemaker. Go out and bring the gospel so that people can be saved, so that they can be brought back into peace with God. So this is who Paul is, and he sets an example for us. This is our calling also. Now jump with me down to verse 13. Verse 13. Now I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that I often planned to come to you, but was hindered until now, that I might have some fruit among you also, just as among the other Gentiles. I am a debtor both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to wise and to unwise. So as much as is in me, I am ready to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome also. So Paul writes, as part of his beginning of the letter, he says, I don't want you to be unaware of this, but I've been wanting to come to be with you. Right? I haven't had a chance to. I've been hindered, but I've been wanting to come to be with you. Why? Because I wanted to see the Colosseum. I wanted to see all the sights. Right? Is that why Paul wants to go to Rome? No. The only reason he wants to go to Rome is to visit the Christians there, and he says that I might have some fruit among you also. I like the strawberries that you serve. Right? What kind of fruit is Paul looking for in Rome? What are the fruits he's looking for? Spiritual fruit. Well, okay, in this specific case, what kind of spiritual fruit? He's not looking for love and patience and kindness and joy, not those spiritual fruit. What kind of fruit is he looking for? He's looking to go and bring more people to Christ, to save more souls. That is a fruit that Paul is looking for, that he wants when he says, I desire to come to you, to be in your midst, to come see you, that I may have fruit among you also. He wants to come and help the church bring more people to Jesus by preaching the gospel. That's what Paul wants to do. Right? His attitude for doing this, he says, he is a debtor. Verse 14, he says, I am a debtor, both to Greeks and to barbarians. It's our duty. It's our duty. We owe a debt. It is our duty to go and preach the gospel. Jesus, before he went to heaven, he said to the disciples, right? We see this in the Great Commission, Matthew chapter 28, verse 19. Go therefore, Jesus says, go. He's sending us. He's sending disciples. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Right? So we've all been given a command to go. And so Paul says, I am a debtor. I owe it to these people to go and preach to them because this is what has been assigned to me. I need to do this. Now here is the key to how Paul preaches the gospel. Okay, I think we can all, at some degree, understand that it's our responsibility and our duty. And I think we can maybe turn our minds around to take on that mindset of being a debtor. Right? We've all called and we can all respond to our call of duty. But what is our attitude? What should our attitude be in doing so? Right? Many times when you are a debtor, when you do something because you feel like you owe someone, our attitude is kind of like, okay, I have to do it, right? You kind of do it grudgingly, and you do it unwillingly. And in this case, in terms of preaching the gospel, I don't know what your attitude is like when you're called to preach the gospel. Sometimes you could be embarrassed, and I'm being very realistic here. Sometimes we're embarrassed to talk about Jesus, right? Sometimes we only know to regurgitate what we've heard, right? So it becomes a message that comes by rote, and then the minute somebody asks a question, you would say, oh, I don't know, come to church and ask the pastor, right? And so for us, the gospel becomes a very fixed message, and that we don't know how to share. Verse 16, Paul, what does he say? Verse 16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as as it is written, the just shall live by faith. So here's Paul's secret. Here's Paul's secret when he preaches the gospel. How does he do it so successfully? How is he able to plant all these churches and bring so many people to Christ? He's not ashamed. He's not ashamed. You know, like I mentioned, I don't know, for whatever reason, I think we're all very self-conscious about our faith. And I've shared this before. In high school, whenever I ate lunch with my friends, you know, before you eat, you should pray. And so we're all sitting around in a circle, and we're about to eat, and I get my food out, and it's time to pray. And this was how I prayed. You know, I look around, see if anyone's looking. Hopefully no one is. And if anyone's looking, boom, right? It was like not even half a second. I didn't want to let people know that I was praying, because for whatever reason, I was embarrassed. I don't understand it, right? I was embarrassed, you know, and I get that nowadays the environment toward Christians has become somewhat hostile. I get that. I get that in many circles, if you say you're a Christian, there is a preconceived notion of what kind of person you are, what kind of beliefs you hold, right? You're one of those pig-headed people who believes in these old myths and fairy tales, and you're unkind and you're not accepting. You know, all these things just come to people's minds when they think of Christians nowadays, right? You know what? The best way to deal with that is to be the kind of Christian that Jesus called us to be, right? To be kind, to be compassionate. Do it without compromising your faith, obviously, right? But be kind and compassionate as we are called to be, right? Break down a stereotype of Christians. Now, don't let it be a fake kind of kindness. I think people can tell, right? It's got to be a kindness, a compassion that is genuine, that comes from your very core. And if it's not in there, you need to ask Jesus, give me this. Jesus, I'm a Scrooge. I am not a naturally kind and compassionate person. Help me to be that, so that your life would come out of me and people can see it, right? And so Paul's secret is he's not ashamed to preach the gospel, and his other secret is he knows that this gospel is what? Verse 16, it says, it is a power of God to salvation. Paul knows that what he is preaching, what he is sharing, is not just a doctrine, is not just a theology, is not just a bunch of rules to impose on people to tell them what they can and cannot do. Paul knows that the gospel itself is power. And that makes a difference for Paul when he preaches. When you know that the words you speak, the very words you speak, represent God and these words have power, then that takes away a lot of the fear and the shame and embarrassment that you would feel. Right? When you go out there and you know that as you speak, these words will take effect. Maybe not now, maybe years later, but when you know that there is power behind these words, there's power in the gospel, that helps you to preach the gospel, right? And so Paul understands, as he writes here, he understands he's not ashamed of the gospel, and this gospel, it is the power of God to salvation. And for Paul, this is real. He knows it's real, right? And I in the notes I have here, I wanted to make a very clear distinction. I'm saying that Paul knows it's real. I am not saying that for Paul it is real, or to Paul it is real, because many people will say that nowadays, right? I'm so glad that you have found faith. I'm so glad that you found religion. I'm glad that it works for you. As long as it brings you some benefit, that's good for you. You know what? It's not just true for me. It is true. I am just very blessed to have stumbled upon this truth and found it, and the truth has saved me. Right? It is not my version of the truth. It is not my version of what works. It is God. It is His power. It is His salvation that He gives to the world, and it is at the core of everything. Right? And so we need to understand this. This is not just our version of religion. This is not just our version of faith. This is coming from the one who created the universe. And we are so blessed to have been invited in to receive this gospel, to know Jesus, and to be saved. And so Paul has power when he preaches the gospel because he knows the gospel is real. It's not just another version, or another way of reaching God. It is the way, the truth, the life for Paul, right? And so this makes a big difference. You know, for Paul, it is real. Remember, do you remember how Paul met Jesus? He was on the way to persecute Christians. He was on the way to persecute Christians. And on the road, that blinding light came and knocked him on his behind. Right? He was blinded for days. He had a very real encounter and experience with Jesus Christ. He heard the voice of the Lord. So for Paul, he cannot help but to proclaim it. Right? For Paul, this isn't something he learned. This was something he encountered. Jesus Christ himself. So it changes Paul's life. And so now he cannot help but preach the gospel. He is obligated. He is a slave. And he was not enslaved by Jesus. He gives himself willingly to Jesus. Jesus, you're my master. You're my Lord. And thank you for saving me. And use me, Lord. Use me as you will. And so this defines Paul. And it defines his life. And it defines what he does for the rest of his life. He's only interested in one thing. Jesus only. Jesus ever. Jesus alone is his message. He's out there. He's preaching it. He's setting up churches. Saying, come and hear and touch this real living Savior that I have encountered. And so that brings me to today's hymn that I wanted to study. Right? Today's hymn, I love to tell the story. Written by a sister by the name of Arabelle Catherine Henke. Turn with me in your bulletins, where we're going to go through this verse by verse. Verse 1, where we're not going to look at the chorus till later. We're going to go through the verses first. Verse 1, I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story because I know it's true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. First of all, right in the beginning, the writer, Catherine, she centers the hymn. She brings the listeners in on one thing. The story is the story of unseen things above. It is a story of spiritual things. It is a story of spiritual things. And it's about Jesus. It's a story of Jesus, of his glory, of his love. And the writer, she knows that the story is true. Just like with Paul. It's not just that it's true for her, but she knows. Did you see that difference? She knows that this is true. And there is a tangible aspect to the story for her. What? Well, what is it? It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. Right? It's not just a story that I like to hear, but this story of Jesus and who Jesus is and Jesus himself satisfies my longings. We all have longings. We all have moments when we feel alone and sad and hurt, or whatever it is that you have a longing for. The story of Jesus and his love, it satisfies those longings in the way that nothing else could. And the writer of this hymn, Catherine, she lived it. And so she knows it. And so this is her story. She wants to tell it. All right? And this would be my question for you as you start thinking about getting ready to share the gospel. How is Jesus real to you? Right? This is something you need to ask yourself. And I hope you know how to answer it. And it does take time. I will admit, it takes time to think. Because if you grew up in church, if you've been coming to church for a while, it's easy to say, yes, I believe Jesus is real. But once the question gets turned around and is asked to you, how is he real to you? Sometimes we get kind of caught and say, wait, you know what? I don't know. I know he's real, but I haven't thought about how he's real. And you need to take time. You need to take time to think about, how is Jesus real to me? How have I experienced him? How have I seen him real and alive and powerful? How have I seen him as my sanctifier, as my savior, as my healer, as my, right? All these questions you can ask yourself. How is Jesus real to me? How has Jesus touched me? How have I seen his handiwork in my life? How has Jesus changed me? This is one of the biggest testimonies, right? Especially for someone who has known you your whole life. We recently, not recently, but almost a year ago now, had a reunion with some of my friends from college. And This is kind of embarrassing to tell, but one of my good friends, I was roommates with him for 2 years. His name is Henry. We were talking about what we're doing in life now, and I said, yeah, I'm a pastor, just recently started a church. And he just got quiet, and he said, man, Jason is a pastor. Who would have thunk it, man? And those are the words that who would have believed that, right? But when people who have known you a long time, who know how you used to be, when they see how Jesus changes you, that's I mean, it's like when you take medicine and you want someone else to take it. If they look at you and you're still sick, they're not going to want to take that medicine, right? But if they remember when you were sickly, and they see you've been taking the medicine, and they see that now you have glowing skin, and you're healthy, and you're vibrant, and you're healthy, right? And everything's going well, they're going to say, I want that medicine. And so when you are being changed, right? The question is, how has Jesus changed you? Ask yourself, look at your life. How has he changed you? That's an important part of your story. How is Jesus more than just a story? Right? This is something you need to be able to share, to be able to tell. Verse 2, I love to tell the story. More wonderful it seems than all the golden fancies of all our golden dreams. I love to tell the story. It did so much for me. And that is just the reason I tell it now to thee. I don't know what it is that you like to talk about. When you get together with friends, if you like to talk about the latest movies that are out, and I don't know, whatever's in the news, politics, the food that you've been trying. I don't know what strikes your fancy, right? But here the writer says, look, this story is more wonderful than any of the golden fancies, of any of the golden dreams that we would have, right? To her, it is something that captivates her. You can't tell a story well unless it truly captivates you, right? And so this is another question to ask yourself. Jesus, I love you, I say I love you, and I appreciate all you've done, but have you really captivated my heart? Have you captivated every fiber of my being? All right, that's a question to ask yourself. I love to tell the story, it did so much for me. Has it really? Yes, it has. You need to go and dig and find out what it has done for you. Because guess what? As you think about it, right? We sing this song once in a while. We especially like to sing it around Thanksgiving. Count your blessings, name them one by one. As you look at what Jesus has done for you, you realize he's done so much for you. And then you realize this is far more worth than anything the world could ever offer. And that builds your story. Verse 3. Verse 3. I love to tell the story. 'Tis pleasant to repeat what seems each time I tell it more wonderfully sweet. I don't know if you ever feel like when you tell a story, the more you tell it, the more repetitive it feels, and you kind of feel like, I'm telling it again, right? I remember when my grandmother, as she got older, she loved to recount her childhood stories. And this is one thing I wish I had done differently. Every time my grandmother would start telling her stories, like, yeah, I heard that. I know it. And I would start telling it back to her. Right? You've told her so many times. I know what happened with the Japanese occupation and how you had to escape. And, that was kind of rude. But the point is, when we tell the story, the more we tell it, it should be, the sweeter it gets, right? The story, each time I tell it, it seems more wonderfully sweet. I love to tell the story. Why do we love to tell the story? Look at this, verse 3. For some have never heard. Some have never heard. Now, from a certain point of view, I would say, when you have got something good, and you find out somebody didn't hear about it, hopefully you're not selfish and you don't want to just hold on to it for yourself. Hopefully your reaction is, I've got something good. This friend has never heard of it. I want to tell him, I want to tell her. Right? Whatever excites you. And again, it comes back to what verse 2 is saying. What are the golden fancies that strike you? That really grab you and captivate you? This story should be something that resonates in your heart and you want everyone to hear. But if you think about it from a more long-term perspective, those who haven't heard the story, where are they going to spend eternity? Right? That's something that should really tug at our hearts. Those who haven't heard the story, they are not in for a good time. And that should move us, is to want to tell the story. The message of salvation from God's own holy word. That should motivate us. That should motivate us that Easter Sunday when we go out to the park. Not that we go out there and say, oh, you're going to hell, you're going to hell. No, but have a heart that really cares for people and where they will spend their eternity. Verse 4. I love to tell the story. Why? Because, or for those who know it best seem hungry and thirsty to hear it like the rest. That verse, when I first sang this song, that verse is the verse that really hit me in the heart. Because I always think those who know the story best, because they've heard it and heard it and heard it, they don't want to hear it anymore. Not that they don't want it. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I'll listen to you tell it. But what this verse is saying is those who know it best are hungering and thirsting for it, just like all the rest. Right? And so the thing that really struck me, the thing that the Lord really convicted me was, well, Jason, if you're not that excited by the story, maybe you don't know it as well as you think. Because if you really knew the story of what Jesus did and what he saved you from, you would never tire of hearing about it. In fact, you would hunger and thirst. Remember what we shared when we read the Beatitudes of what it means to hunger and to thirst? Right? When you really hunger and thirst for something, nothing stands in your way. Right? When you sit down with a friend, a brother or sister in Christ, right? And when they start telling you about how good Jesus has been to them, do you tune out and go into autopilot mode and start, oh, amen, amen. I have no idea what he's saying, but amen, praise the Lord. Or are you hanging on to every word because you want to know, what is Jesus doing in your life? How is Jesus real? I want to know. I want to hear it. I want to know what Jesus is doing in your life. And guess what? When you're done, I have a story to tell too. Right? When we get together, what is it that occupies our thoughts? What is it that occupies our mind? What is it that we love to share? Right? Those who seem to know it best seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like the rest. And then at the very end, when in scenes of glory. What are the scenes of glory? When we go and meet the Lord. When in scenes of glory, you'll be singing a new song. Right? You'll have a new voice. You may have a new instrument. Will you have a harp? I don't know. Will you have wings? Whatever heaven is like, you'll be singing a new song. And then that day when you sing that new song, you will realize it's been the same old story. And will always be the same old story, because this is the only story we need. The story of who Jesus is, a story of God sending his only begotten Son to die for us because we are a mess. The story of God looking at each and every one of us and saying, I love you and I want to save you. So I am sending my Son to die for you. That is my story. That is your story. That is all our stories. And I hope that all of us can be walking together in this direction toward loving to tell that story. The chorus, I love to tell the story. To be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and his love. We are ambassadors for Christ. Let us learn, number one, let us learn how to tell our own stories. Like I've often shared, your testimony is a weapon. Your testimony is a weapon. Do you know that? Revelations tells us your testimony is a weapon. Your testimony, the Bible tells us your testimony is part of what is going to slay the devil. So use it well. Learn to handle it well. I don't know if you want it to be like a stick you can beat the devil with, or a sword. I don't know. Pick your weapon of choice. Picture it. Practice using your testimony. And grow to love it. Grow to love it and let it be a part of who you are. Let us bow our heads and pray. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you have done. Thank you, Lord, for everything that you are to me. Thank you that this morning here, each and every one of us, Lord, have a story. Help us, Jesus, to love the story, and help us, Jesus, to know how to tell it. Pray these things in Jesus' name.